"Why is Mommy missing from this photo, sir?" Clara Bellamy asked, lifting the open album with both hands as if it were too heavy for one small girl to carry. The Moretti living room went silent. Dominic Moretti's black-suited hand stopped above his silver signet ring. Vivian Cross reached for the album with a perfect smile. "Sweetheart, that is a family photograph." Clara pointed to the empty space beside Dominic. "But that's Mommy's dress." 3 hours earlier, the Moretti mansion had not yet gone quiet. It hummed with the soft machinery of wealth. Crystal glasses being lined in rows, silver forks being measured by the inch, security radios clicking near the front doors, and the low voice of Mrs. Agnes Vale correcting a young server because the white napkins were folded one corner too high. The engagement dinner was supposed to begin at 7. By 6, Vivian Cross had already walked through the living room twice in a pale silk dress, touching nothing, changing everything. She moved one vase from the mantel. She turned one framed photograph slightly toward the light. Then she stopped at the long walnut table near the fireplace, where the Moretti family album had been placed open for the guests to admire. "This one," she said softly. Mrs. Vale looked down. "Are you certain, Miss Cross?" Vivian's smile did not move. "Dominic needs to remember who stayed." Across the hall, Clara Bellamy stood beside a rack of garment bags, wearing her worn cream cardigan and a silver star clip in her hair. She was not a guest. Her mother, Elena Bellamy, had been hired to make emergency alterations on Vivian's dinner dress after one seam had pulled loose. Clara had been told to wait near the service hallway, keep both hands to herself, and not step onto the rug because the rug was older than most people in the house. She tried. She truly tried. But the album caught the light in a strange way. The picture on the open page showed a younger Dominic Moretti standing in the same living room, his face colder than the men around him, his hand resting on the cracked edge of the marble side table. There was a blankness beside him. Not empty space exactly. Something softer, blurred, brushed over, like fog placed where a person should have been. Clara took one step closer, then another. Behind her, Elena's voice came from the hallway, low and tense. "Clara, baby, stay where I can see you." But Clara's fingers had already gone to the pocket of her dress, where she kept the little folded photograph her mother never let anyone touch. At home, it lived under the bed inside a cookie tin with rent receipts, a hospital bracelet, and one dried blue ribbon. Clara only knew it was important because sometimes, when Elena thought she was asleep, she unfolded it and pressed her thumb over the woman in the blue dress as if keeping her from disappearing. Clara opened her picture now. Same room, same marble table, same dark frame on the wall, same Dominic Moretti. But in Clara's picture, Elena Bellamy stood beside him, younger and smiling carefully, wearing a blue dress and the same silver star clipped now in Clara's hair. Before Clara could breathe, Mrs. Vale appeared at her shoulder. "That is not for you." The old woman's hand closed over the album page too fast. Clara stepped back, clutching her photograph. Vivian turned from the fireplace, her perfume arriving before her voice. "Is there a problem?" "No problem," Mrs. Vale said. Too quickly. Clara looked from Vivian to the album, then to the little picture in her hand. She did not understand why adults could look calm while doing something wrong. She only understood that in one picture, her mother was standing where she belonged, and in the other, someone had made her vanish. At that moment, Dominic Moretti entered the living room. Every guard straightened. Every conversation died down by instinct. He wore a black tailored suit, his silver signet ring catching the chandelier light as he adjusted his cuff. Clara should have moved away. Instead, she picked up the album with both hands. Vivian said her name sharply, though Clara had never told it to her. Dominic looked down. Clara lifted the page toward him. "Why is Mommy missing from this photo, sir?" Vivian's smile returned, smoother than before. Children confuse stories when they grow up around scraps. Silas Crane, standing near the bar, watched Clara as if she were a document that needed shredding. Dominic did not answer. His eyes had dropped to the space beside his younger self, to the blur, to the false softness, to the place where no one was supposed to stand anymore. Clara placed her folded photograph beside the album page and whispered, "She wore blue." Dominic's fingers tightened once around his ring, because on the sleeve of his younger self, almost invisible under the glossy finish, a tiny green-blue sliver still clung to the edge of the picture, like the hem of a dress someone had failed to erase. The blue sliver was so small that no one in the room should have cared about it, and yet Dominic Moretti stared at it as if a bullet had been left under the glass. Clara held her breath. Her little photograph trembled beside the album page, the crease down the middle cutting across her mother's blue dress, but not enough to hide the woman's face. Vivian Cross moved first. Not quickly. Never quickly. She crossed the rug with the polished patience of someone used to making other people feel unreasonable. "Dominic," she said softly, almost tenderly. "The child is confused." Clara looked up at her. "I'm not confused." Vivian's eyes lowered to the folded picture. "Sweetheart, poor children build stories around scraps. It is how they survive frightening things." The words were gentle enough to sound kind to anyone not listening closely. Mrs. Agnes Vale gave a small nod, as if Vivian had restored order. Silas Crane, near the bar cart, set down his untouched drink and smiled without warmth. A service child with a damaged photograph, minutes before a family announcement, he said. "That is not innocence. That is timing." Clara did not know what timing meant in the way he said it. She only knew it made the room look at her differently. The guards by the doors did not move, but their shoulders changed. Elena Bellamy stood half-hidden in the service hallway, one hand still holding a needle and loose thread from Vivian's altered dress. Her face had gone pale in a way Clara had seen only once before, when a final notice had been taped to their apartment door. "Clara," Elena whispered. "Come back here." Clara almost did. Then Mrs. Vale reached for the album again. Dominic's voice stopped her. "No, one word. Quiet. Flat." The old house seemed to obey before the people did. Mrs. Vale's hand froze above the page. Dominic did not look at Clara with softness. He looked at the photograph, then at the girl, then at the silver star clip in her hair. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Clara touched the clip with 2 fingers. "Mommy gave it to me." Vivian gave a small, wounded laugh. "A hair clip proves nothing. It proves she keeps things," Clara said. "Even when people tell her not to." A tiny silence followed that answer. Not because it was loud, but because it landed in a place no adult wanted opened. Dominic extended his hand, palm up, not taking, only asking. Clara hesitated, then placed the folded photograph in it. His thumb did not touch Elena's face. It stopped at the silver star in her hair, then moved to the identical clip on Clara's head. Same 5 points. Same tiny dent on the left edge. Same cheap metal trying to look like something precious. For the first time, Vivian's smile thinned. "Dominic, really? You have guests arriving. Are we going to let a child from the service hallway turn your engagement dinner into an interrogation?" Silas stepped closer, his voice low enough to feel private and public at once. "This is exactly how extortion begins. A sad child, a sentimental object, a powerful man made to feel guilty." Dominic lifted his eyes. "Did I say I felt guilty?" Silas stopped smiling. It lasted less than a second, but Clara saw it. She was good at seeing small things because small things were usually all children were allowed to keep. A crumb of bread under a chair. A rent envelope hidden in a drawer. Her mother's hand shaking before she said everything was fine. Mrs. Vale moved behind Clara now, close enough that Clara could smell starch and old lavender on her black dress. "Give Mr. Moretti the picture," the housekeeper said. "Then return to your mother." Clara's fingers curled around the edge of her cardigan. "He has it. Then you have done enough." "No," Clara said. Her voice was not brave. It was thin, but it did not break. "Because the album one is wrong." Vivian bent slightly, bringing her perfect face closer to Clara's. "Little girls should be careful before accusing adults of lying." Clara looked at the album, then at Vivian. "Then why are you scared of my scrap?" Something sharp passed through Vivian's eyes and vanished behind a smile. Dominic saw it. He said nothing. Instead, he turned the album page a fraction toward the chandelier and watched the glossy surface catch the light. Mrs. Vale forgot herself. That photograph should not be here. No one breathed. Clara looked at her. Dominic looked at her. Even Elena, in the hallway, lifted her head. Mrs. Vale's mouth tightened as if she had bitten the inside of her cheek. I mean, she corrected, too late. Such personal items do not belong on a formal table. Dominic slowly lowered his gaze to the old woman's hands. They were clasped neatly at her waist, but her right thumb was rubbing the side of her index finger over and over, polishing away a stain that was not there. Then he looked back at Clara's folded picture, at the blue dress, at the silver star clip, at the missing woman in his official album. His voice, when it came, was almost calm. Mrs. Vale, he said, how did you know it was that photograph? Mrs. Vale did not answer at first. In a house where men had disappeared for choosing the wrong words, silence was usually safer than speech, but this silence came too late. Dominic Moretti watched her the way he watched men across poker tables at the back of his casino. Not for the lie itself, but for the little movement that came before it. Mrs. Vale lowered her eyes to the album. Because Miss Cross just said it was a scrap, she said. I assumed. You assumed very specifically, Dominic said. Vivian gave a soft laugh and stepped between them as if smoothing a wrinkle from the room. Dominic, this is becoming cruel. The child clearly wants attention. Her mother is standing right there. Let Elena handle her. At the sound of her mother's name in Vivian's mouth, Clara felt Elena move in the hallway. Not forward, back, just half a step, the way she moved when a landlord raised his voice or when a cashier looked too long at a declined card. Clara did not like that step. She picked up her folded photograph from Dominic's palm before anyone could stop her and placed it flat on the album page. They are the same room, she said. Silas Craneside. Children compare shapes. It means nothing. Clara pressed one small finger to the corner of her photograph. Same table. She touched the glossy album page. Same crack. Dominic looked. In both photographs, the marble side table behind his younger self had a thin gray fracture running down from the left corner like a lightning mark. Clara moved her finger again. Same picture on the wall. Vivian's smile held, but her eyes flicked towards Silas. He adjusted his cuff, slow and clean, hiding the face of his watch beneath his sleeve. Clara saw that too, though she did not understand why a grown man would hide time. Then she pointed to the dark framed painting behind Dominic in both pictures. In Clara's photograph, the glass over the painting caught a faint reflection of Elena's shoulder and blue dress. In the Moretti album, the place beside Dominic had been blurred smooth, but inside the painting glass, almost too pale to see, the same woman still stood there, trapped in reflection. Clara whispered, Mommy says mirrors don't know how to lie. Dominic stopped breathing for one beat. No one else in the room knew why those words cut through him, but he did. Years ago, in the first Moretti restaurant before the chandeliers and the armed gates and the private rooms, Elena Bellamy had stood beside a cracked hallway mirror and said those exact words while fixing his crooked tie. Mirrors don't know how to lie, Dominic. People do. He had forgotten the tie. He had not forgotten her voice. Vivian reached for Clara's photograph. Enough. Clara pulled it back against her cardigan. No, her voice shook now. Mommy said don't let anybody take this one. For the first time, Dominic looked past Clara to Elena. Elena did not plead. She did not explain. She stood in the service hallway with a needle still caught in the fabric between her fingers, looking at the album as if it were a grave that had opened in the middle of the room. Silas tapped the table once, then again, then a third time. The guard, near the double doors, turned his head slightly, received the signal, and stepped out into the corridor without a word. Dominic saw it. He did not chase the guard. He did not raise his voice. He only placed one hand over the album so no one could close it, then looked at the faint reflection in the painting glass. The woman had been erased from the room, but not from the mirror behind him. The reflection in the painting glass did not move, but the room did. A quiet rearranging began, almost invisible unless you knew how power protected itself. One guard returned to the doorway and stood with his hands folded. Silas Crane leaned closer to Dominic, lowering his voice as though kindness required privacy. "A glare on old glass is not evidence," he said. "It is dinner, Dominic. Your guests are arriving. Your fiancée is being humiliated in her own home by a child from the service corridor." Vivian looked down as if wounded, one hand resting lightly near her throat. Mrs. Vale stepped behind Clara again, not touching her, but close enough to make the little girl feel the size of her own body. 8 years old. Cream cardigan. Scuffed shoes. One folded photograph against a room full of men who could buy buildings without changing their voices. "Clara?" Elena said from the hallway, barely above a whisper. "Come here, baby." Clara wanted to go. She wanted her mother's hand, the safe corner near the garment bags, the ordinary smell of thread and steam. But Dominic's palm was still on the album, and the blue sliver was still there, and the mirror had kept what the album had lost. "No one is being humiliated by a question," Dominic said. "Not unless the answer is dangerous." Silas's expression tightened, then smoothed, then tested quietly. "Later. Now." Dominic lifted his eyes toward the chandelier. "Turn off the warm lights." Mrs. Vale's head snapped up. "Sir, the dinner setting. Now." The room changed color. Gold softened into white. The walls looked colder. The polished wood lost its glow. Under the hard light, every silver fork, every crystal glass, every face became less forgiving. Dominic opened the glass cabinet near the fireplace and removed a brass-handled magnifying lens that had belonged to his father. He placed it above the album page. Clara stood beside the table, both hands gripping the edges of her cardigan. Vivian gave a quiet, embarrassed laugh for the guests beginning to gather at the far end of the room. "Dominic, this is absurd." He did not answer. He tilted the album page by a 1/4 inch. The glossy surface caught the white light, and the empty space beside his younger self thickened strangely, like a scar under makeup. Around his shoulder, a hairline ridge appeared in the print. A cut. Not deep, not obvious, but there. Clara leaned forward without touching the page. "It's thicker there," she said. Mrs. Vale's voice sharpened. "Do not breathe on it." Clara pulled back at once, cheeks flushing, but she did not drop her eyes. "I can see it from here." Dominic shifted the lens again. Beneath the lower edge of the photograph, half hidden by the album sleeve, a scratched marking surfaced in faded gray ink. Luca and Son Studio, frame 47B. Someone had tried to scrape away the numbers, but the pressure of the pen remained in the paper like a bruise. Silas stepped in smoothly. "Old photographs are restored all the time. Smoke damage, watermarks, discoloration. You know this house has archives older than most banks." "Then the archive will have the original," Dominic said. Mrs. Vale folded her hands. "The archive key was misplaced years ago." Clara looked at the old woman's black apron. A thin silver chain had slipped from the side pocket, barely visible against the dark fabric. At the end of it hung a small brass key with a red paper tag, turned inward as if hiding its own name. Vivian moved suddenly and knocked her wineglass with the back of her hand. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth, and several guests gasped, grateful for a simpler emergency. Mrs. Vale rushed forward with a napkin. Silas exhaled as if order had returned. But Clara did not look at the wine. She looked at the key. Dominic followed her eyes, and in the cold white light, the red tag swung once from Mrs. Vale's pocket, showing the faded words "Photo Archive." The red tag did not swing far, only an inch or two, but it moved enough for the whole room to see the lie Mrs. Vale had just told. The old housekeeper closed her hand around the chain at once, too late to make it disappear. Dominic did not reach for it. He looked at Marco Russo, who had been standing near the service door with the stillness of an old driver who had survived this family by learning when not to speak. "Marco," Dominic said, "take the key from Mrs. Vale. Open the photo archive. Bring only what is marked Luca and Son Studio, frame 47B. Mrs. Vale's face lost its careful shape. "Sir." The archive is not prepared for guests. Then the guests will wait. Vivian stepped forward, her voice wrapped in concern. Dominic, you are frightening everyone over an old picture. Clara still watched the key. Her small fingers held her mother's folded photograph against her chest as if the room might try to steal it again. When Marco approached, Mrs. Vale gave him the key with the offended dignity of a woman surrendering silverware. Not evidence. But her thumb pressed hard against the red tag before she let go, smearing a faint crescent of dust across it. Dominic saw that too. The archive was not far. A narrow door behind the breakfast room led to a windowless storage space with cedar shelves, locked filing drawers, and gray boxes labeled in Mrs. Vale's neat handwriting. Dominic did not follow at first. He stayed in the living room, forcing everyone else to stay with him, forcing the silence to stretch. Clara stood beside Elena now, but not behind her. Elena's hand rested on her daughter's shoulder, light and shaking. You should not have brought that picture out, Elena whispered. Clara looked up. But they made you gone. Elena closed her eyes, and the pain on her face was not surprise. It was recognition. When Marco returned, he carried a flat archival box with both hands. A thin layer of dust coated the lid except for one clean rectangle where something had recently been moved. Dominic noticed it before anyone spoke. Set it down. Marco placed the box on the walnut table, away from the spilled wine. Dominic turned to the security chief near the wall. Photograph the box before it is opened. Timestamp it. Record who touches it. Silas gave a quiet scoff. That is unnecessary theater. Dominic did not look at him. Chain of custody is only theater to men who prefer smoke. The guard took out his phone and began recording. Dominic opened the box himself. Inside were contact sheets, envelopes, and old negatives sleeved in plastic. Marco's finger moved carefully over the labels until he stopped. Frame 47B. The contact sheet slid free with a dry whisper. There it was. The same living room. The same cracked marble table. The same younger Dominic. And beside him, not blurred, not softened, not erased, stood Elena Bellamy in a blue dress, one hand near his sleeve, the silver star clipped bright in her hair. Clara leaned forward but did not touch. That's Mommy, she said. No one corrected her this time. Dominic lifted the sheet under the cold light. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes went very still. In the frame, Elena was holding a red envelope against her side. A dark stamp crossed its corner. Bellamy Doc Trust. Dominic stared at it longer than he stared at her face. Vivian noticed. So did Silas. Beneath the contact sheet was a folded invoice from Luca and Son Studio. Restoration and alteration. Client pickup. Vale. Payment authorized through Crane Family Office. The date was 8 years old. Clara did not understand the words, but she understood names. Vale, she whispered. Like Mrs. Vale. Dominic placed the invoice beside the album, then drew a slow breath through his nose. Photograph that too. Marco reached deeper into the box and found the original print. On the back, in blue ink faded soft at the edges, were 6 words written in Elena's hand. Dominic promised no one would erase us. Clara touched her own pocket, where rent receipts at home carried the same looping E, the same little lift at the end. Like her mother's hand always tried to rise even when life pushed it down. That's Mommy's writing, she said. Dominic looked from the words to the invoice, from the invoice to Mrs. Vale, then finally to Silas Crane, the man who had advised him through funerals, raids, casino licenses, family wars, and 8 years of hating a woman who might never have left him at all. Dominic slid the original photograph into the inside pocket of his black suit, close to his chest, and said quietly, No one leaves this room until my lawyer sees what my consigliera paid to erase. The words did not land like a threat. They landed like a door locking. No one leaves this room until my lawyer sees what my consigliera paid to erase. Silas Crane did not flinch, and that made him more dangerous than if he had. He only adjusted his cuff again, hiding the watch face beneath black wool, and said, Dominic, you are letting an altered invoice rewrite 8 years of family history. Dominic looked at the old paper on the table. No, he said. Someone already rewrote it. I am asking who paid the printer. The room stayed frozen around the long white tablecloth, the spilled wine darkening at the edges like blood in snow. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, a grandfather clock struck the half-hour. One low bell, then another. Clara stood close to Elena, holding her folded photograph with both hands now, no longer because she wanted to show it, but because she feared it might be taken away if she loosened even one finger. Dominic took out his phone and called his private attorney, Benjamin Hale. He did not explain loudly. He turned slightly toward the fireplace and spoke in a voice too low for guests, but not too low for fear. I need the old Bellamy Dock Trust file, the abandonment letter, any hospital paperwork from St. Gabriel 8 years ago, and every document Silas Crane prepared within 72 hours of that date. Silas's eyes sharpened at the mention of St. Gabriel. Vivian noticed, and for the first time, her perfect posture looked learned rather than natural. Elena whispered, Dominic, please. Clara shouldn't hear this. Dominic turned to Clara. Marco will take her to the kitchen. Clara shook her head once. Not wild. Not disrespectful. Just firm in the small way children are firm when the truth is the only thing they own. I don't want money, she said, as if someone had accused her of it again without speaking. I don't want your house. I just want them to stop saying Mommy ran away. Elena's hand covered her mouth. Dominic looked at the girl. For a long second, then nodded to Marco. Kitchen doorway, where she can see her mother. Not closer.
Marco ubad.
In the kitchen, the world sounded wrong because it was too normal. A spoon touched porcelain. A refrigerator hummed. Rain began ticking softly against the tall windows over the sink. Clara sat on the edge of a wooden chair with her feet not reaching the floor, watching the living room through the open doorway, while Marco placed a bowl of soup in front of her. She did not eat. She kept the picture flat beneath her palm. Benjamin Hale arrived in 12 minutes with a leather folder and a tablet, his tie crooked from being pulled on too fast. He did not greet Vivian. He did not greet Silas. He opened the Bellamy Dock Trust file on the table and began laying documents beside the photograph. First came a letter, supposedly from Elena, saying she was leaving Dominic forever and wanted no contact. Then came a hospital record from St. Gabriel, dated the same night. Elena Bellamy, admitted 11:42 p.m. wrist injury. Sedation administered. Discharge pending. Then Benjamin placed a copy of a confidentiality agreement beside it, also bearing Elena's signature, also dated that night. Dominic stared at the three signatures. The letter, the hospital form, the silence agreement. His face did not change, but his right hand slowly closed around the silver signet ring until the skin across his knuckles went pale. That is not how she writes her name, Clara said from the kitchen doorway. Everyone turned. She shrank a little, then lifted her chin. Mommy's E goes up at the end, like it's trying to fly. Benjamin looked at the back of the original photograph. Elena's handwritten sentence was still there, soft blue ink and that rising E. He placed it beside the abandonment letter. The difference was not dramatic. That made it worse. The fake was close enough to fool a grieving man who wanted certainty. Close enough to become a weapon. Dominic looked at Silas then, really looked at him, and for the first time in 8 years he did not see a loyal advisor. He saw a man standing between him and a hospital bed, between him and a letter never delivered, between him and the woman he had punished in his heart because someone had handed him paperwork while she was too hurt to fight it. Dominic did not accuse Silas. That was what made the room colder. A younger man, a louder man, would have thrown the folder across the table or put a hand around someone's throat and called it justice. Dominic Moretti only looked at the forged letter, the hospital record, the silence agreement, and the sentence on the back of Elena's photograph. Then he closed the folder halfway, as if the truth had become something sharp enough to cut anyone who touched it carelessly. Dinner continues, he said. Vivian blinked. Dominic. The guests came for a family toast. His voice stayed even. They will get one. Silas studied him, trying to find anger, grief, weakness, anything he could steer. Dominic gave him nothing. He turned to Benjamin Hale. Copy everything. Photograph every page. Get the server logs from the security room. Archive corridor first. Benjamin nodded once and opened his tablet. A small blue loading circle appeared on the screen. No one moved while it spun. In the kitchen doorway, Clara watched the adults pretend the room had not changed. Marco placed a pencil and a napkin in front of her. Draw what you remember, he said gently. Only what you saw. Clara drew the long table, the album, Vivian's wineglass, Mrs. Vale near her shoulder, Silas by the bar. Then she drew 3 tiny marks on the table beside Silas. Top, top, top. He did that before the guard went out, she whispered. Marco's eyes lifted toward Dominic. Dominic came to the doorway and looked at the napkin drawing. He did not praise Clara like she had performed a trick. He only asked, before or after you said the mirror didn't lie? Clara thought hard. In the kitchen, a clock ticked above the pantry door. Rain tapped the window. Her soup sat untouched, a thin skin forming over the top. After, she said. Right after. And the guard looked like he already knew what it meant. Dominic folded the napkin once and handed it to Benjamin. Add it to the file. Silas gave a thin smile from the living room. Are we entering children's drawings into evidence now? Dominic looked back at him. Only when they remember what grown men hoped no one saw. Vivian's phone vibrated on the bar cart. She did not touch it. It vibrated again, creeping almost half an inch across the polished wood. Clara looked at the screen before Vivian flipped it face down. She could not read the whole message, only 2 words bright enough before the screen went black. The girl. Dominic saw Clara seeing it. He turned away as if he had not. Mrs. Vale, he said. Bring every family album to the dining table. All of them. Miss Cross, stand beside me for the toast. Vivian recovered first. Of course, she said, too quickly, smoothing the front of her pale dress. Silas nodded as if agreeing to a harmless ceremony. But his hand drifted toward his own phone, and Benjamin's tablet softly chimed. The first security file had finished downloading. On the screen, grainy footage from the archive corridor showed Mrs. Vale entering the storage room that morning, long before Clara ever touched the album. She carried no cleaning basket. She carried a white envelope. 11 minutes later, she came out without it and pushed the bar cart toward the living room. Dominic watched the footage once, then again. He said nothing until Marco leaned close and murmured, Boss, Elena isn't in the service hall. Dominic's eyes moved at last. Not fast, not panicked, deadly calm. Marco continued. One of Silas's men took her toward the side study. In the hallway beyond the kitchen, a door handle stopped mid-turn. Clara saw Vivian standing there, her phone clutched in one hand. Her smile gone completely because she had finally understood that the child in the cream cardigan was no longer alone. Vivian held the door handle without turning it, caught between the hallway and the lie she had been building all evening. Clara did not run from her. She only stepped closer to Marco, one small hand still flat over her folded photograph, and watched Vivian's phone glow once in her fist before the screen went dark. Dominic walked past Vivian without touching her. Open the side study, he said. Marco moved first. Behind the door, Elena Bellamy stood beside a narrow writing desk with one of Silas's men at her shoulder and a paper spread before her. A pen lay across the signature line. Elena's face was colorless, but the pen had not touched the page. Benjamin Hale picked it up with 2 fingers and read the heading. Statement of voluntary departure and prior misrepresentation. Vivian's voice floated from the doorway, still soft, still rehearsed. It was only meant to end the confusion before the toast. Dominic turned to her. He did not speak. That was worse. He looked at Elena, at the paper, at the man near her chair, and for 1 second the great Dominic Moretti, the man who made rooms fall silent by entering them, looked as if he had finally seen the shape of his own blindness. Under his roof, under his lights, beside his table, they had been preparing to erase her again while he stood 30 feet away. Benjamin took the unsigned paper, photographed it, and placed it in a clear evidence sleeve from his briefcase. Then Dominic led them back into the living room, not with a shout, not with a gun, not with the old family violence men whispered about in restaurants, but with a calm so complete that every guest moved aside before he reached them. At the dining table, the engagement champagne waited untouched. Vivian's place card sat beside Dominic's like a promise already spoiled. He opened the family album to the altered photograph and laid it flat on the white cloth. Beside it he placed Clara's folded picture, then the contact sheet, then frame 47B, then the invoice from Luca and Son Studio, then the hospital record from St. Gabriel, then the silence agreement, then the forged departure letter. Then Benjamin turned his tablet toward the room and played the archive camera footage of Mrs. Vale entering the storage room with the white envelope. No one breathed when Marco reached beneath the lower shelf of the bar cart and pulled out that same envelope, taped under the polished wood where servants were trained not to look. Clara pointed before anyone asked. "That's where her hand went when the wine spilled," she said. "Not to the glass. Under there." Marco opened it. Inside was a letter, yellowed at the edges, addressed in Elena's real handwriting to Dominic Moretti. Benjamin read only enough to end the room's pretending. "I did not leave you. Silas made me sign papers after the hospital. If I disappear from your life, look at the Doc Trust." Dominic went pale. Not angry, not dramatic. Pale, as if the blood had finally understood what the heart had refused for 8 years. Mrs. Vale covered her mouth. Silas looked at the exits. Vivian looked at the chair she had planned to own. Clara walked to the table, removed the silver star clip from her hair, and set it gently on the photograph where Elena stood in the blue dress. "Mommy said she used to stand here," she said. Vivian's face hardened. She turned to Elena, who stood near the service doorway in her old coat, and whispered loudly enough for the whole room, "You don't belong at this table." Dominic looked at Vivian then, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above the rain against the windows. "From tonight on, no one in this house gets to call erasure loyalty." He took off his silver signet ring, set it on Elena's restored photograph, and looked at Benjamin Hale. "Preserve every original. Then call the court." The word court changed the room more than any shout could have. Vivian's face emptied first, not of beauty, but of ownership. Silas Crane took one step back, and 2 Moretti guards who had obeyed him for years did not move with him. Benjamin Hale began placing each document into separate evidence sleeves. The altered album page, Clara's folded photograph, the contact sheet marked frame 47B, the restoration invoice, the hospital record, the silence agreement, the forged departure letter, the camera stills, the text messages, and Elena's hidden letter. He labeled each one in black ink while the engagement champagne went warm in untouched glasses. Dominic stood at the head of the table, his signet ring still resting on Elena's restored image. "Silas Crane," he said, calm enough that no one mistook it for mercy. "You are removed from every Moretti trust, account, board seat, and advisory role effective tonight. Benjamin will file for an emergency injunction before morning. The Bellamy Doc Trust does not move 1 inch until a judge sees what you buried under my name." Silas opened his mouth, then looked at the phones now raised around the room, at the lawyer recording, at the evidence in clear sleeves, and closed it. Vivian tried to save herself with softness. "Dominic, I only wanted to protect you from an old wound." Dominic looked at the unsigned paper she had tried to force Elena to sign. "You were not protecting a wound. You were keeping it open so you could live inside the scar." He turned to the guards. "Miss Cross leaves with nothing that belongs to this house. Her access is revoked tonight." Vivian's diamond ring sounded small when she set it on the table. Mrs. Vale stood near the service doorway, smaller than she had ever made Clara feel. When Benjamin placed a formal statement before her, her hand shook so badly the pen scratched the page before forming words. She wrote that she had hidden Elena's letter, replaced the album page, lied about the archive key, and followed Silas because he called it loyalty. Dominic did not thank her. Truth given after 8 years of silence did not become courage just because it arrived in time to save the guilty. Then he turned toward Elena. For a moment, the room waited for him to offer money, A house, a car, the old easy language of powerful men trying to buy back what they had failed to protect. He did not. "Elena Bellamy," he said, and her name sounded different spoken clearly in that room. "You will have your own attorney, not mine, paid for by a protected fund I cannot touch once it is established. Your claim to the Bellamy Dock Trust will be restored through the court, not through my favor. Every medical bill tied to St. Gabriel will be audited. Every document you were forced to sign will be challenged. And if you choose never to step inside this house again after tonight, no one here will call that betrayal." Elena did not cry. She looked at the table, at the letter she had written 8 years ago, at the photograph where she had been put back beside the man who finally looked ashamed enough to be honest. "I want my daughter safe," she said. Dominic nodded once. "Then that comes first." Clara stood beside her mother, the silver star clip no longer in her hair but on the photograph. Benjamin slid the original frame 47B into the family album under a fresh protective sheet, replacing the altered print. Dominic took a pen and wrote beneath it, slowly, in front of everyone. "Elena Bellamy did not abandon this family. This family abandoned the truth." After midnight, the mansion was quiet in a different way. Not clean, not healed, but awake. In the kitchen, Marco set a full bowl of soup in front of Clara and a cup of coffee beside Elena. No one told them to stay near the service hall. No one told them not to touch the good plates. Clara looked through the open doorway at the album resting on the dining table, the page bright under a single lamp, her mother's name finally visible where silence had been. She leaned against Elena's arm and whispered, "Mommy, they can see you now." Dominic heard it from the hallway and could not speak, because for the first time in 8 years, the smallest voice in his house had told the truth louder than all his power. "Someone in this house sold you," the little girl whispered. Vincent Callahan's hand stopped an inch above the black-sealed envelope. Around him, the marble hall of the Callahan mansion went still so fast the crystal chandelier seemed louder than the people beneath it. Molly Reed stood at the foot of the staircase, both arms wrapped around her faded school backpack. From inside it came a faint metallic hiss. Adrian Vale smiled before anyone else could speak. "Poor child," he said softly. "She's repeating her mother's panic." Molly's fingers tightened around the zipper. "I don't know what sold you means exactly," she whispered, "but I heard them say your name to someone who doesn't live in this house." 3 hours earlier, Molly had been sitting on the back steps with her knees tucked under her chin, waiting for her mother to finish cleaning the dining room. The Callahan house always sounded different after sunset. During the day, it was full of polished shoes, ringing phones, silver carts, doors opening for men who never opened doors for themselves. At night, it breathed like something alive. Pipes clicked behind the walls. The old grandfather clock in the East Hall counted each hour in a deep wooden voice. The kitchen smelled of lemon soap, burnt coffee, and the garlic bread the family never finished. Molly was supposed to stay in the laundry room until Hannah Reed's shift ended. She knew that rule. She knew most of the rules. Don't touch the front staircase. Don't look into the dining room when the men are talking. Don't ask why Mr. Callahan's drivers changed cars without changing coats. Don't repeat names heard through doors. And never, ever walk into the main hall when Vincent Callahan was holding a family meeting. But Molly also knew sounds. She knew her mother's soft steps from the housekeeper's shoes that squeaked near the sink. She knew Frank Doyle, the head of security, always cleared his throat before turning a corner. She knew Vincent Callahan's cane tapped once, then paused, as if even the floor waited for permission. And she knew Adrian Vale's voice. It was smooth, careful, never hurried. The kind of voice adults used when they wanted children to think nothing was wrong. That evening, his voice came from the wrong place. Not the study, not the dining room, the back corridor, the narrow one near the service entrance where the staff hung coats and kept umbrellas nobody important ever borrowed. Molly had been drawing a crooked house on the back of an old receipt when she heard glass break. Not loud, just a small, bright crack. Then a man whispered, "Use the maid's card." Molly froze. Her pencil stopped halfway through a window. A second voice answered, lower than Adrian's but not as familiar. Callahan leaves after dinner. Port side. Same envelope. A pause. Then Adrian Vale said, "The black seal means confirmed." Molly did not understand all of it. She did not know what port side meant. She did not know why a seal mattered. But she knew her mother's card was clipped to Hannah's apron in the laundry room. She knew her mother had spent 11 years being careful in this house. Careful with plates. Careful with names. Careful with silence. Molly slid her hand into her backpack and found the little silver recorder her mother used to leave voice notes for grocery lists because her phone screen was cracked. Her thumb trembled over the red button. Click. The tiny machine woke with a soft hiss. Molly held it against her chest and moved closer to the half-open service door. She saw only pieces. A gray sleeve. Polished black shoe. A smear of black wax on the tile near the mop bucket. Then Adrian turned slightly, and Molly ducked behind the laundry cart so fast the metal wheels squeaked. The talking stopped. For one terrible second, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and Molly's own breath trapped in her throat. Then Adrian's voice returned, still gentle. "Make sure the maid is the one they look at." Molly pressed the recorder so hard into her palm that the corner bit into her skin. A door closed. Footsteps moved away. Only then did she crawl out from behind the laundry cart. On the floor, beside the mop bucket, a tiny piece of black sealing wax had broken off and stuck to a wet thread from her mother's cleaning cloth. Molly picked it up carefully. The wax was still warm. The wax was still warm when Molly closed her fingers around it. She did not run to Vincent Callahan right away. Children did not run in that house unless something was burning, bleeding, or already too late. So Molly tucked the black wax into the pocket of her sweater, slid the recorder deep into her backpack, and waited until the sound of men's voices moved from the back corridor toward the marble hall. That was when Frank Doyle appeared at the kitchen doorway. "Where's your mother?" he asked. Molly looked past him. Two men in dark suits stood behind him. Not angry, not loud, just waiting. That was worse. In the Callahan house, loud meant someone still wanted an answer. Quiet meant the answer had already been chosen. Hannah Reed came from the sink with her sleeves rolled up, her uniform damp from dishwater, a clean towel still in one hand. "What happened?" she asked. Frank did not meet her eyes. "Mr. Callahan wants you upstairs." Hannah's face changed only a little. Her hand tightened around the towel, then loosened. She glanced at Molly, and in that glance Molly saw the rule her mother had taught her without ever saying it. When powerful people call your name, do not give them fear to use. They brought Hannah through the service hallway, then through the door she almost never used, the front hall. Molly followed even after one guard put a hand out to stop her. She slipped under his arm before he could decide whether stopping an 8-year-old was worth the embarrassment. The marble floor was cold under her sneakers. Vincent Callahan stood near the long black table beneath the chandelier. The sealed envelope lay in front of him now, untouched. Beside it sat a folder with Hannah's name printed on the tab. Not handwritten, printed, prepared. Adrian Vale opened it with 2 fingers, as if the papers inside were clean and the woman in front of him was not. "This is not a punishment, Hannah," Adrian said, voice smooth as polished wood. "It is a loyalty review." Hannah looked at the folder, then at Vincent. "A what?" Adrian turned one page toward the room. "Your staff card was scanned at 12:17 a.m. in the private corridor outside Mr. Callahan's study." A small sound moved through the hall. Not a gasp. Something smaller. The sound people made when they were grateful suspicion had chosen someone else. Molly looked at her mother. Hannah did not deny it fast enough. Vincent noticed. His eyes, dark and tired, settled on her face. "Were you in that corridor?" Hannah swallowed. "Yes, sir." Molly felt the whole room lean. Adrian did not smile, but his stillness became satisfied. Vincent's voice stayed low. "Why?" "I heard glass break," Hannah said. "From the back hall. I thought someone had dropped something near the study door. I went to check. That's all." Adrian closed the folder halfway. "And you did not report it." "I didn't see anyone." "But you used your card." "The door was half-latched. I pushed it open." The system says otherwise. Hannah looked down, not because she was guilty, but because poor people were trained to look down when paper called them liars. Molly stepped forward. My mom went there, she said. Hannah turned sharply. Molly? She did, Molly said, voice shaking but clear. Because she heard glass. She always checks when glass breaks. One time Mrs. Bell cut her hand in the pantry and nobody heard her except Mom. Adrian sighed gently. This is exactly why children should not be placed inside adult matters. Molly looked up at Vincent, not Adrian. If my mom did wrong, she'll say she did wrong, Molly said. But my mom doesn't know how to talk in the man's voice inside my recorder. The hall went still again. This time Vincent did not look at Hannah. He looked at the backpack. Adrian moved before anyone else did. Not fast enough to seem afraid. Just fast enough to seem responsible. Mr. Callahan, he said, for everyone's safety, I suggest we take the child's bag. Children can cause chaos with toys when adults are under pressure. Molly hugged the backpack tighter. It's not a toy. Adrian crouched slightly, his smile kind enough for anyone who was not watching his eyes. Then you won't mind if I hold it for you. His hand reached for the zipper. Molly stepped back. Her heel caught the edge of the rug. The backpack slipped against her chest. The front pocket opened, and something small dropped onto the marble between her shoes. A broken piece of black sealing wax, with a gray thread still stuck inside it. The piece of black wax landed without a sound anyone should have heard. But everyone heard it. It struck the marble between Molly's sneakers, rolled once, then stopped against the brass leg of the hall table. The gray thread caught inside it curled upward like a tiny trapped hair. Adrian's hand remained in the air for 1 second too long. Then he straightened. Hannah looked down at the wax, and Molly saw her mother's face go pale with confusion. Not fear, not guilt, confusion. She had never seen the thing before. Vincent Callahan moved first. Not quickly. He stepped around the table and bent just enough to pick up the broken wax with the edge of a folded handkerchief. Nobody spoke while he turned it under the chandelier light. Black wax, matte, not glossy, softened at one corner, as if it had been pressed too recently, then broken before it fully hardened. Vincent looked at the sealed envelope on the table. The seal there was whole, stamped with the Callahan wolf. The wax in his hand was smaller, thinner, and dirtier. Dust clung to one side. Something sharp and chemical rose from it. Lemon floor cleaner. Kitchen tile. The back corridor. Molly watched his eyes narrow. Where did you get this? Vincent asked. Molly swallowed. By the mop bucket. Near the service door. Adrian gave a quiet breath, almost a laugh. Mr. Callahan, with respect, that means nothing. Staff dispose of trash there all day. Vincent did not answer him. He turned the wax again. A mark sat along the broken edge. Not a full stamp, only half of one. Curved beak. One wing. The faint outline of a small raven. The room changed in a way Molly could feel before she understood it. Frank Doyle, who had been standing by the front doors, looked at the envelope, then at Vincent, then at Adrian. Hannah whispered, "What is it?" Vincent closed his fingers around the handkerchief, hiding the wax from view. "It is not from the public seal." Adrian's expression did not move. "There are many seals in this house. Not this one." Vincent's voice was low enough that people leaned toward it. "The raven mark is used only on draft routes before. They are approved. It never leaves my study." Molly looked at the envelope on the table again. It suddenly seemed heavier than paper. Vincent continued, 3 people are allowed to touch that draft wax. Myself, Mr. Vale, and Natalie Russo, my attorney. Adrian's smile returned, thinner now. Then the answer is simple. Hannah took it from the trash. Or the child did. A frightened mother builds a story. A frightened child helps carry it. Hannah lifted her head. I didn't take anything. Adrian turned to her with patient disappointment. You already admitted you were in the corridor. Molly stepped closer to her mother. Because of the glass. Because you say so, Adrian replied. No, Molly said. Because I heard it. Vincent looked at her then. Not kindly, carefully. That was worse and better at the same time. He was not believing her because she was small. He was examining her because something in the room no longer fit. He held up the wax. "A child can invent a story," Vincent said quietly. "She cannot invent the smell of my study wax on the service floor." Nobody breathed for a moment. Then Vincent placed the wax beside the sealed envelope, not touching it, as if the two pieces of black wax were strangers forced to confess they knew each other. He turned to Frank. "No one leaves this hall." Frank nodded once and moved to the front doors. Vincent looked at the guards by the staircase. No phones. No hallway calls. No messages. A ripple of discomfort passed through the men in suits. Molly saw it now. Not fear of danger, but fear of being seen. Adrian adjusted one cuff. Only one. His right cuff. The left one stayed hidden behind his jacket sleeve. Vincent noticed. So did Molly. Then Vincent looked around the marble hall and said, "We are going to do something very simple. I am going to ask everyone the same question." Adrian's eyes flicked, just once, toward the service corridor. Molly's hand tightened around the strap of her backpack, because she knew the answer before Vincent asked. And she knew someone in that room had already prepared a different one. Vincent Callahan did not raise his voice. That frightened the room more than shouting would have. He stood beside the black table with the broken wax on one side and the sealed route envelope on the other, then looked at every face in the marble hall as if he were reading names carved into stone. "At 12:17, he said. "Who heard the service doorbell?" No one answered. Not the housemen lined near the side wall. Not the kitchen staff with their hands folded too tightly in front of them. Not the guards pretending their eyes were fixed on Vincent when they were really watching Adrian Vale. Hannah Reed opened her mouth, then closed it. Vincent noticed that too. He turned to her. "Mrs. Reed." "I heard glass," Hannah said carefully. "Not the bell." Adrian gave a small nod, as if that helped his case. "There you have it. The card log says she entered. She heard glass. She went near the study. Everything else is a child's imagination trying to protect her mother." Molly shook her head. It rang twice. Every adult turned toward her. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "What rang twice?" "The back door," Molly said. "The little bell above it. It doesn't sound like the front door. The front door goes long. The back door goes short. Last night it went short, then stopped, then went short again." Frank Doyle stepped closer to the service hallway entrance. Molly pointed toward it without looking away from Vincent. "Because someone opened it but didn't let it close all the way. Like when you hold it with your foot." Adrian's expression stayed smooth. Too smooth. "Children remember sounds strangely," he said. "Especially when frightened." Molly did not argue with him. She unzipped her backpack just enough to slide one hand inside. The tiny silver recorder came out in her fist, dull under the chandelier, scratched along one edge where she had dropped it once at school. A guard moved. Vincent lifted one finger. The guard stopped. Molly placed the recorder on the table, but she kept her hand near it, as if the little machine might be hurt if left alone with adults. "I pressed it after the glass," she said. "Not before, so it missed some words." Vincent looked at Frank. "Play it." Frank glanced at Molly first. She nodded. The button clicked. For 2 seconds, only static filled the hall. Then came the sound. A sharp little bell. Silence. A second bell, cut off halfway. The hall seemed to shrink around that tiny noise. Then glass cracked somewhere in the recording, bright and thin. A man's voice followed, buried under static. "Use the maid's card." Hannah put one hand over her mouth. Molly did not look at her. She watched Vincent. The voice on the recorder was not clear enough to name. It was low, damaged by distance, wrapped in the hiss of the old machine. But the words were there. Not imagined. Not repeated from a frightened mother. There. "Use the maid's card." Vincent turned toward the security desk tucked beneath the East Arch camera. Frank crossed the hall and entered a code into the monitor. For screens woke. Front gate, East Hall, kitchen, service entrance. The service entrance screen went black. Frank's jaw tightened. Footage is missing. How much? Vincent asked. Frank checked the timestamps. 9 minutes, 40 seconds. Adrian sighed as though disappointed in poor maintenance. Old system. We've discussed replacing it for months. Kitchen camera, Vincent said. Frank switched screens. The angle was bad. A reflection from the stainless steel pantry cabinet showed the service corridor like a warped mirror. At 12:18, a shape crossed the reflection. A man. No face. Gray sleeve. Left hand holding a glass. On that hand, for half a second, a dark signet ring caught the pantry light. Molly leaned forward. I didn't see his face, she said, but I remember his hand. He held the glass with his left hand like he didn't want the camera to see his ring. Adrian gave a soft laugh. Then he lifted both hands, palms out. No ring. A few people exhaled, as if the whole nightmare had become silly again. Molly looked at his fingers, then at the floor. Then she pointed to the dark rug beside Adrian's chair. There, she whispered. Near one leg of the chair, pressed into the velvet fibers, was a pale perfect circle where a ring had rested long enough to leave its shape behind. At first, no one moved toward the rug. The pale circle in the velvet was no bigger than a coin, but it made the whole hall feel smaller. Adrian Vale looked down at it, then back up with the faint, tired patience of a man being forced to entertain nonsense. A mark on a rug, he said. That is what we are calling proof now? Vincent did not answer. He looked at Molly. The little girl's hand still hovered over the recorder. 2 fingers curled around the edge as if it were something alive. Her knuckles had gone white. The silver machine looked too small for the table, too cheap for the room, too fragile to be holding anything that could turn powerful men silent. Put it in the center, Vincent said. Molly looked at him, then at Adrian. No one takes it from me? No one touches it without my permission. That was not comfort. It was a rule. And in that house, rules mattered more than comfort. Molly stepped closer to the black table. She placed the recorder beside the broken wax, between the sealed envelope and Hannah's accusation folder. For a second, it looked like a child had laid her heart in the middle of a room full of knives. Vincent nodded to Frank. Again. Frank pressed play. The tiny hiss returned. Then the 2 short bells. A clipped silence. The sharp crack of glass. Then the damaged voice, low beneath the static. Use the maid's card. Hannah closed her eyes. The recording continued this time. A second voice answered, farther away but clearer. The port schedule is already sold. The words did not explode through the hall. They settled. Heavy. Final. Every person in the room understood enough. Someone had not merely opened a door. Someone had delivered Vincent Callahan's movement to people waiting outside his walls. Adrian spoke first, because men like him knew silence could become an accusation if held too long. Static. A cheap device. A frightened child. This proves only that something was recorded somewhere. Molly's voice was small. It was here. Adrian turned to her. You think it was? Molly shook her head. No. I know. Vincent's eyes moved from the recorder to the walls. How? Molly swallowed. She pointed upward, not at the chandelier, but toward the east side of the mansion. The clock. Everyone listened. For a moment, there was nothing but breathing. Then Vincent looked at Frank. Play the last 10 seconds. Again. Frank rewound. The second voice returned. The port schedule is already sold. Behind the words, faint but steady, came a deep wooden chime. 1, 2, 3. The sound continued beneath the static, slow and old, until it struck 12 times. Frank stopped the recorder. Nobody looked at the grandfather clock in the hall, because everyone already knew. That clock had not worked since winter. Its hands had been frozen at 4:06 for months. Vincent turned his head toward Adrian. There is only one old clock in this house that still runs after midnight. Adrian's jaw moved once. Molly whispered, the one in Mr. Vale's room. A breath passed through the staff line. Not loud enough to be rebellion, just loud enough to prove they had all thought the same thing and hated themselves for it. Vincent did not order Adrian seized. He did not slam his hand on the table. Instead, he looked at the woman standing near the inner archway, a sharp-eyed attorney in a dark navy suit who had been silent since the beginning. Natalie. Natalie Russo stepped forward. Seal the device. Make 3 copies of the audio. 1 stays with me, 1 with you, 1 in the safe. Record every hand that touches it from this second forward. Adrian's smile thinned. Vincent, surely you are not treating a child's toy as… From this second, Vincent said without looking away from him. No one calls this a toy again. This is evidence. The word changed Molly's face. Not happy, not safe, but seen. Natalie took out a clear evidence sleeve from her briefcase. Frank photographed the recorder before lifting it with gloved fingers. Molly watched every movement, lips pressed together, as if one careless touch could erase her mother's name from the truth. Then Natalie connected the recorder to a small laptop. The waveform appeared in blue lines across the screen. She listened with one earpiece, marked the bells, the glass, the voices. Her expression did not shift until she reached the final portion. She paused, then looked at Molly. There are 18 seconds here that were not played. Molly's face drained of color. Hannah touched her shoulder. Baby. Molly did not look at her mother. She looked at Vincent Callahan, because those 18 seconds were not about the port. They were about what would happen to the maid and her daughter before sunrise. Molly did not answer Natalie right away. The blue waveform sat frozen on the laptop screen, 18 seconds highlighted near the end like a bruise no one wanted to touch. The recorder rested inside its clear evidence sleeve now, safer than Molly had felt all night. Vincent Callahan looked at the little girl. You held back part of it, he said. It was not an accusation. That made it worse. Molly's lower lip trembled once, but she pressed it still with her teeth. Her mother's hand tightened gently on her shoulder. I didn't want them to take my mom, Molly whispered. No one in the hall moved. Adrian Vale stood near the edge of the table, hands folded, face still composed. But the skin beside his left eye gave the smallest twitch, so quick a person could have missed it if they were not watching for cracks. Vincent was watching. What is on the last part? He asked. Molly looked at her mother first. Hannah shook her head slightly, not because she wanted the truth hidden, but because mothers sometimes tried to protect children from the weight of being believed too late. Molly reached for the table. Please don't send her away, she said. The words did something the evidence had not. They made the staff look down, not at the floor, at themselves. Vincent's face hardened, but not toward Molly. No one is sending your mother anywhere, he said. Play it. Natalie touched the laptop. For a moment there was only static. Then the old clock in Adrian's room gave its final low chime. A man's voice followed, clearer now, because whoever spoke had stepped closer to the recorder without knowing a child was hiding behind a laundry cart. After the old man walks into the port, make the maid look guilty. Hannah's hand slipped from Molly's shoulder. The voice continued. The kid heard enough. Send both out before sunrise. The room went cold. Not quiet, cold. There was a difference. Quiet could mean respect, fear, calculation. Cold meant every person had just understood that the accusation against Hannah was not a mistake. Was a tool. A clean, convenient place to put blame because nobody in that mansion expected a housekeeper to survive a powerful man's story. Molly stared at the recorder as if it had betrayed her by speaking the words out loud. Hannah slowly covered her mouth. For 11 years, she had washed wine from linen napkins, polished silver no one thanked her for touching, carried trays past men who stopped talking when she entered because they believed silence was enough to erase her from the room. Now those same men could not look at her. Vincent turned to Adrian. Adrian lifted his chin. A distorted voice. No name. No face. We are still dealing with fragments. Hannah laughed once. It was not humor. It broke out of her like a cracked dish slipping from tired hands. Fragments, she said. Her voice shook, but she did not lower her eyes. I have worked in this house for 11 years. I missed birthdays. I came in sick. I taught my daughter to be quiet in hallways because quiet people keep their jobs. She looked at the folder with her name on it. They didn't need to prove I was guilty. They only needed everyone to believe a maid didn't deserve an explanation. Molly reached into the pocket of her sweater. Her fingers fumbled, then found the folded paper she had been carrying since dusk. It was a child's bus ticket, creased into a tiny square, the corner softened by her palm. She unfolded it carefully and placed it beside the recorder. "A man gave me this at the back door," she said. "He said if I loved my mom, I should make her leave tonight." Vincent stared at the ticket. On the back, written in blue ink, was a phone number. Natalie slid the ticket into another clear sleeve, photographed both sides, then looked at Vincent. "May I?" Vincent nodded. Natalie dialed the number from her phone on speaker. Everyone listened to the ringing. Once, twice. Then, from beyond the front doors, faint but unmistakable, a phone began to vibrate. Frank Doyle turned first. The sound was coming from the driveway, from inside Vincent Callahan's own car. The phone in Vincent Callahan's car kept vibrating. No one in the marble hall moved until Vincent lifted one hand. Frank Doyle crossed the floor with two guards behind him, opened the front doors, and stepped into the cold driveway light. The sound became clearer the moment the door swung wide. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It was coming from beneath the rear passenger seat of Vincent's black sedan. Frank reached in with a gloved hand and pulled out a cheap prepaid phone wrapped in gray tape. No contacts. No saved messages. One incoming call from Natalie Russo's number. Molly stared at it from beside her mother. That was the first time Vincent understood the shape of the betrayal. Not one whispered meeting. Not one stolen route. Someone had reached into his car, his schedule, his staff, his house, and placed danger close enough to touch his coat. Adrian Vale let out a careful breath. That proves the car was compromised. It still does not prove by whom. Vincent looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He picked up the black sealed envelope and slid it back into his inside pocket. "Then we continue," he said. Hannah looked up, frightened. "Sir." Vincent did not look at Adrian. He looked at the room. The meeting at the port proceeds. Everyone returns to their assignments. The house behaves as if nothing has changed. A ripple of confusion moved through the staff and guards. Molly's fingers closed around her mother's sleeve. Vincent saw it. He stepped down from the head of the table and stopped in front of her. He did not kneel. He did not make a show of kindness. But he lowered his voice so only Molly, Hannah, and the nearest few could hear. "You don't need to be brave anymore," he said. "Your place is behind adults now. Our job is to finally do this right." Molly looked at him as if she did not know whether adults could still be trusted with that sentence. Vincent turned to Frank. "Move Mrs. Reed and her daughter to the library. 2 guards outside. Nobody speaks to them without Natalie present." Then quietly the trap began. Vincent called Adrian into the East Hall and spoke for less than a minute. He showed him a fresh route sheet sealed with red wax. "If anything feels wrong, I leave by Old Chapel Road." Adrian studied the paper, then nodded with perfect gravity. "Wise." 5 minutes later, Vincent called Marco, his driver, into the side office. This time the paper was sealed in black wax. "You take me through Mill Street." "No deviación." Marco nodded, sweating through his collar. Then Vincent called Elise Harper, his private secretary, into the breakfast room. He gave her the white-sealed route. "If Frank asks, tell him I chose the river tunnel. 3 routes, 3 seals, 3 names. 1 lie waiting to choose its owner." Molly sat in the library with Hannah, but she did not stop watching. Through the cracked door, she saw shoes cross the hallway. Frank's heavy steps. Natalie's narrow heels. A guard with a limp. Elise Harper's pale pumps moving too fast toward the study. Molly held her mother's hand under the table. On the library wall, a painting of Vincent's father stared down at them with cold gray eyes. Under that face, Hannah looked smaller than she had ever looked in her own kitchen. 20 minutes passed. Then Frank entered without knocking. He held up a tablet. Message intercepted, he said. Burner phone in the sedan sent one outgoing text before we removed the battery. It bounced through a relay, but the content came through. Vincent read it once. His face did not change. Frank turned the tablet so Natalie could photograph it. The message said he changed route. Use Old Chapel Road. Red wax. Adrian's route. Molly did not understand all the words, but she understood Vincent's silence. It was not confusion anymore. It was aim. Frank's hand shifted toward the weapon under his jacket. Vincent stopped him with a look. Not yet. Adrian stood at the far end of the hall, speaking softly with two men as if he were still part of the wall that held the house upright. Natalie lowered her voice. We have enough to detain him. No, Vincent said. We have enough for him to deny. I want the buyer. I want the staff member who helped with the card. I want the person who prepared Hannah's blame before the first accusation was spoken. From the library doorway, Molly looked past Vincent. Elise Harper had returned to the study. She carried a folded paper in one hand. Molly saw Elise glance over her shoulder, then slip into the room. With the fireplace, the little girl stood before her mother could stop her. Molly, Hannah whispered, but Molly was already at the door. She pointed across the hall. She put something in the fire. Frank moved fast. By the time he reached the fireplace, one corner of the paper had blackened and curled. He pulled it out with iron tongs and dropped it onto a silver tray. Natalie leaned over it. For a second, no one spoke. The paper was not a route. It was not a message to Adrian. It was a confession. Already typed. Already signed with Hannah Reed's name. The confession with Hannah Reed's name on it did not finish burning. That mattered. Natalie Russo lifted the damaged sheet with gloved fingers and placed it inside a clear sleeve. The bottom corner had turned black. One edge had curled. But the signature line was still there, and so was the first sentence. I, Hannah Reed, admit to using my staff card to access Mr. Callahan's private corridor. Hannah stared at the paper as if it had learned how to speak in her voice. I never wrote that, she whispered. Vincent Callahan looked at the half-burned confession, then toward the service hallway at the back of the house. Bring everyone there, he said. Frank frowned. The back hall. Yes. Not the dining room. Not the study. Not the polished office where men in suits made decisions over expensive whiskey. Vincent chose the narrow corridor behind the kitchen, where the floors smelled of lemon cleaner and steam, where staff coats hung on metal hooks, where Hannah had waited earlier like a woman already found guilty. Within minutes, the house gathered there. Guards, drivers, kitchen staff, clerks, Elise Harper with ash on one sleeve, Adrian Vale, still composed, still wearing the face of a man offended by disorder rather than afraid of truth. Vincent had a small folding table brought in and placed directly under the service bell. One by one, Natalie laid the evidence across it. The recorder in its sleeve, the child's bus ticket, the broken black wax with the gray thread caught inside, the staff card access log, the printed map of Old Chapel Road sealed with red wax, the prepaid phone recovered from Vincent's car, the half-burned confession. Molly stood beside her mother, not in front of her now. For the first time that night, Hannah's hand was not pushing her daughter behind her. It was holding her. Natalie opened her tablet. We reviewed the access system, she said. Hannah Reed's staff card was used at 12:17 a.m., but the card used was not the original. She turned the screen toward the room. Her real card was logged in the laundry room 3 minutes earlier, where Mrs. Reed was clocking out inventory. The second scan came from a cloned credential. A murmur broke through the staff line. Hannah's lips parted. Natalie continued. The service entrance camera was manually disabled for 9 minutes and 40 seconds. The same account that disabled it accessed the route printer at 11:58 p.m. Adrian's voice was calm. Whose account? Natalie looked at him. Yours. Elise Harper suddenly covered her mouth. Vincent noticed. Speak. Elise shook her head, tears shining but not falling. I didn't know it was going to be like this. Adrian turned toward her, and for the first time his politeness sharpened into warning. Elise. She flinched. Vincent stepped between them with one slow movement. Elise stared at the floor. Mr. Vale told me to print the confession. He said Hannah was already finished. He said if I didn't certify the timestamp, I'd lose my position, and people who lost positions in this house didn't always find safe ones outside. Adrian gave a soft, disappointed sigh. A terrified secretary trying to save herself. That is all this is. Natalie tapped the tablet again. The confession was printed from the private printer in your room, Mr. Vale. The bus ticket number matches the SIM card found inside Mr. Callahan's car, and the red route you alone received was leaked 12 minutes after you left the East Hall. Adrian looked at Vincent, not the evidence. You are letting servants and children dismantle years of loyalty. Vincent's face did not move. No, he said. I am letting evidence dismantle a lie. Natalie pressed play. The cleaned audio filled the back corridor. Adrian's voice came through clearly now, stripped of static and charm. The maid is useful because nobody at this table respects her enough to doubt the accusation. The words landed harder in that hallway than any shout could have. Hannah closed her eyes. Molly looked around at the adults who had avoided her mother's face all night. One by one, they looked at Hannah now. Vincent turned to the entire house. The insult was the plan, he said. He counted on all of us believing a maid was easier to blame than a man in a suit. Adrian's mask finally cracked. He leaned toward Vincent, voice low enough to sound almost friendly. If I fall, he said, half your house falls with me. Vincent looked at the table of evidence, then at Hannah and Molly. And for the first time that night, everyone understood the choice in front of him was not whether Adrian was guilty. It was whether Vincent Callahan would expose the rot in his own house, even if the walls had to come down with it. Vincent Callahan looked at Adrian Vale for a long time. The old Vincent might have ended the night with a closed door, a private room, and a silence everyone in the house would pretend not to understand. That was how men like him protected power. They buried rot under marble and called the floor clean. But Hannah Reed was standing in the back corridor with her daughter's hand in hers. And the recorder was still on the table. Small, silver, unblinking. Vincent turned to Natalie Russo. Prepare the full file. Adrian's expression changed then. Not fear exactly. Something colder. Disbelief. You wouldn't. Vincent did not look away from him. I just did. Natalie opened her briefcase on the folding table and began organizing each piece of evidence into separate sleeves. The recorder, the broken black wax, the bus ticket, the clone card report, the printed confession, the phone from the sedan, the route map with the red seal, the audio transcript with Adrian's words marked in black ink. Frank Doyle stood behind Adrian, but he did not grab him. Not yet. Vincent wanted no shadows left for Adrian to hide inside. The Port Authority gets the route leak, Vincent said. The insurance board gets the vehicle tampering. The legal counsel gets the forged confession. Every legitimate Callahan business freezes Mr. Vale's access before sunrise. Natalie nodded, already writing. Adrian laughed once, very softly. You are going to hand them your own house. Vincent's eyes moved across the back corridor. The hooks where staff coats hung. The mop bucket. The service bell. The place where Hannah had been expected to stand quietly while people in suits decided what her life was worth. No, Vincent said. I am going to stop pretending this house was clean because the dirt was kept back here. Frank stepped forward then and took Adrian by the arm. Adrian did not fight. Men like him rarely fought when the room could finally see them. He only looked at the staff, as if one of them might still be afraid enough to save him. No one moved. Elise Harper gave her statement with Natalie beside her. Marco, the driver, surrendered his phone and signed his own. 2 guards admitted they had been told not to report the camera failure. Each name went into the file. Each silence became something written. Then Vincent turned to Hannah. For the first time all night, he did not speak to her from the head of a table. He stood in front of her in the narrow back hallway and lowered his voice. Mrs. Reed, he said, this house accused you without giving you the respect of a question. That was my failure before it was his crime. Hannah blinked quickly, but she did not look down. Vincent turned so everyone could hear him. Hannah Reed is cleared. The report against her is void. Her wages for every hour she was held from work tonight will be paid. Her contract will be rewritten by counsel, with representation present. No staff member in this house will ever be questioned alone again. No accusation will stand without evidence that can be tested. And the service entrance is no longer the only door available to the people who keep this house standing. The words settled slowly, not like charity, like structure. Molly looked at the recorder on the table. Natalie had finished sealing it, but the little machine still looked like it belonged to her somehow, as if a piece of her courage had been trapped inside the plastic sleeve. She picked it up with both hands and offered it to her mother. Hannah stared at it, then gently closed Molly's fingers around it and guided it toward Vincent instead. "Keep it somewhere you can see it," Hannah said. "Not because of what he did, because of what she had to do before any of you listened." Vincent accepted the recorder. For a moment, the Mafia boss who had been feared across the harbor did not look powerful. He looked like a man finally seeing the cost of being obeyed too easily. Later, when the statements were signed and the evidence locked away, Vincent walked Hannah and Molly through the house himself. Not through the kitchen, not past the mop sink, not out by the trash bins where staff cars waited in the dark. He led them to the front hall, the same marble hall where Molly had first whispered the truth. Molly stopped at the threshold and looked up at him. "Does my mom still have to leave through the back door?" Vincent opened the front door. Cold morning air entered the mansion, clean and pale. "No," he said. "The woman who saved this house does not leave through the back door." Hannah's face broke then, not into weakness, but into something that had been held too long. She stepped through first. Molly followed, still holding her mother's hand. A Callahan car waited outside for them. The main car, not the service van. Vincent stood in the doorway until they were gone. Behind him, the chandelier glowed over a quieter house, a house that had lost its favorite lie. On his desk the next morning, inside a clear evidence box, he placed the silver recorder. Not hidden, not filed away, placed where every man who entered his office would see it. Because the smallest person in his house had done what the strongest men around him had not. She had told the truth when telling it could have cost her everything.